The executive offices of Hartwell Industries had always been Rachel Hartwell's sanctuary. At 39, she'd transformed her father's small manufacturing business into a tech empire. But tonight the familiar comfort of her corner office felt hollow. It was past 8 o'clock, and most of her employees had long since gone home to their families. Rachel should have left hours ago too, but the prospect of returning to her empty penthouse apartment felt more exhausting than staying to review quarterly reports. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago, and despite getting primary custody of her 6-year-old twins Emma and Ethan, the logistics of single parenthood still felt overwhelming. Tonight they were with her ex-husband for his weekend visitation. The apartment would be silent in ways that had nothing to do with her children's deafness. A rhythmic tapping sound echoed through the usually quiet building, pulling Rachel from her thoughts. It was coming from the break room down the hall. A steady, melodic beat that seemed almost musical. Rachel walked toward the sound, curious about who else might be working this late. What she found in the break room doorway made her stop and stare. Miguel Santos, their night janitor, sat on the floor surrounded by an array of plastic buckets, metal containers, and cleaning supplies. But he wasn't cleaning. He was playing music, creating complex rhythms by tapping the containers with his hands and drumsticks fashioned from wooden spoons, and dancing around him. Their faces glowing with pure joy were Emma and Ethan. Rachel's heart lurched. Her children weren't supposed to be here. They were supposed to be at David's apartment across town, but there they were, moving to rhythms they couldn't hear but somehow felt, their small hands mimicking Miguel's movements as they created their own percussion on smaller containers. What? Rachel started to speak, then caught herself. Miguel looked up and saw her, his weathered face breaking into a gentle smile. He gestured for her to wait, then continued his rhythm while signing to the twins. Rachel watched in amazement as her children responded with their own sign language, their faces animated in ways she rarely saw at home. When the impromptu concert ended, Emma ran to her mother, her hands moving rapidly in the sign language they'd all been learning since the twins' diagnosis 3 years ago. "Mama, Miguel knows music with hands. He teaches us drum feeling." Rachel turned to Miguel, who was carefully setting down his makeshift drumsticks. "Miguel, How did they get here? They're supposed to be with their father tonight." Miguel's expression grew concerned. "Ms. Hartwell, they were in the lobby when I arrived for my shift, just sitting there with their backpacks. The security guard said their father dropped them off, said there was some emergency and you'd arrange for them to wait here." Rachel's hands clenched into fists. Another one of David's emergencies. Probably a last-minute date or business meeting that he'd decided was more important than his children. He'd done this before, leaving the twins with babysitters or at her office without warning. "I'm so sorry, Miguel. You shouldn't have had to," she began. "No sorry needed," Miguel said gently, his accented English warm with sincerity. "They are wonderful children. We were just, how do you say, making music together." Ethan tugged at his mother's sleeve, then signed rapidly. Rachel translated his words. "He wants to know if you'd like to see what Miguel taught them." What followed was 15 minutes of the most beautiful music Rachel had ever experienced. Miguel showed her how he'd created different tones using various containers, how he'd taught the twins to feel the vibrations through the floor and their hands. He demonstrated how they could see rhythm through his facial expressions and body movements. "Music isn't just sound," Miguel explained, his hands moving as he spoke. "Music is feeling, is movement, is connection between hearts. Your children, they understand this better than most hearing people." Rachel watched as Emma and Ethan performed their own composition, their faces concentrated and joyful. For the first time in months, she saw her children not as kids struggling with a disability, but as young people expressing themselves in their own unique language. "Miguel," Rachel said quietly, "how do you know sign language? And how do you understand them so well?" Miguel's smile grew sad. "My son Carlos. He was born deaf. He would be about their age now if—" He paused, collecting himself. "My wife and I, we learned to speak with our hands, to feel music together. Carlos taught us that silence isn't empty. It's full of things most people never notice." "Where is Carlos now?" Rachel asked softly. "He and my wife, they were in an accident 2 years ago, coming home from Carlos's school concert." Miguel's voice grew thick with emotion. "I came to this country after that. Needed to start over. But I never wanted to forget what Carlos taught me about finding joy in a world that doesn't always understand." Rachel felt tears gathering in her eyes. Here was this gentle man who cleaned offices for a living, carrying his own profound grief, and yet he'd spent his evening creating magic for her children. "Miguel," she said, would you be willing to teach them more? I mean, officially. I could pay you. We could set up regular sessions." Before Miguel could answer, Emma was pulling on Rachel's hand, pointing toward the kitchen area adjacent to the break room. "Mama, come see! Miguel showed us kitchen music too." They followed the twins into the corporate kitchen where Miguel had apparently continued their musical education. Various pots, pans, and utensils were arranged on the counter like a percussion section. But what stopped Rachel cold wasn't the makeshift instruments. It was what she saw on the whiteboard mounted on the kitchen wall. In neat handwriting, Miguel had written out a weekly schedule. Monday, rhythm basics. Tuesday, different textures of sound. Wednesday, musical storytelling. The schedule went on, detailing a complete music curriculum designed specifically for deaf children. "Miguel," Rachel whispered, "you planned all this?" He looked embarrassed. I hope you don't mind. I know they are not my children. But when I saw them sitting alone in the lobby, they reminded me so much of Carlos. I thought maybe I could share some of the joy he taught me." Rachel stared at the schedule, at this man who earned minimum wage cleaning offices, but had spontaneously created a more thoughtful educational program than any of the expensive specialists she'd hired. "You've done all this, and you've known them for, 3 hours?" "Sometimes," Miguel said softly. "The heart recognizes what it needs to give and what it needs to receive. Your children have beautiful spirits. They help heal something in me I thought was broken forever." 6 months later, Miguel Santos was no longer just the night janitor at Heartwell Industries. He was the company's first director of accessibility programs, with an office next to Rachel's, and a salary that reflected both his wisdom and his worth. The Heartwell Music Therapy program that grew. From that evening in the break room now served deaf and hard-of-hearing children throughout the city. But more than that, it had given Rachel's family something they'd been missing without knowing it: a bridge between worlds, built by a man who understood that sometimes the most profound connections happen in silence. Emma and Ethan still called Miguel their drum teacher, but Rachel knew he was much more than that. He was the person who'd shown them that being different wasn't a limitation. It was simply another way of experiencing the beautiful complexity of life. And on quiet evenings, when Rachel listened to the gentle percussion floating from the company's music room, she was reminded that sometimes the most important conversations happen without words, and the most healing music is the kind that resonates directly in the heart.